Because in this presentation, we're really going to talk about how to plan and build a strategic and successful organization, which is not as fun of a topic. So, strategic planning in general. 30% of organizations with strategic plans grow 30% faster. That is a fact from Journal of Management Studies. 71% of fast-growing organizations have a strategic plan. That's from the Journal of Small Business Management. 48% of organizations fail to meet half of their goals. Half, right? So half of organizations fail to meet half of their goals. That's a problem. And we'll talk about why that happens. That was from Bridges. And then finally, 95% of employees or members of an organization don't even understand the strategy or the plan, which means almost everybody. I would ask for hands right now, but I don't want anybody to get in trouble. Because sometimes it's simply not clear to us what the point is. What is the point of university? Transfer knowledge, higher education. I heard get a job. Being successful in society. So I actually argue against all of those. It's not a university is the progression of knowledge, right? And a lot of us tend to miss this because you go to a university to study to get a job. But what you fail to realize is that the whole point of university is to prepare you to do more. And it's the more part a lot of us forget about. And this is that whole thing, is that 95% don't see the mission. We get caught in the moment, not the bigger idea. So what I'm going to be focusing on is how to ensure that the big idea comes across and continues to be tracked and continues to have a focus and some implementation. So we'll talk about strategic thinking and planning, then we'll talk about leadership, which is extremely important, organizational structure, which is also very important, and then problem solving and decision making. The first one, the thinking and planning, is where we're going to spend almost all of our time. And then leadership, organization, and problem solving, we don't spend that much time. They say, last presentation I said Mike Tyson's quote, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. That's true. The trick is after you get punched in the face, you can still come back to the plan. Right? Things happen. Sometimes you need to pivot, you need to shift goals, but you can never lose sight of what is the goal and how to get there. If you lose that sight, that's when you have an organizational failure. So, strategic planning. A lot of times, plans are created without us. Somebody just says, this is the plan. How can you participate in a plan that you are not a part of making? It's difficult. So when you want good strategic planning, involve all the stakeholders. Everybody that has to participate in the plan should help come up with the plan in some way or another. If you exclude individuals, how can you expect them to participate in the plan itself? You're simply giving them orders. And we'll talk about later why giving orders is bad. But you need the majority of the organization to buy in. So ensure that these stakeholders are invested. And if they're not, if they don't follow the plan, then it just doesn't work. That's why half of all plans fail. Then you have to disseminate information. A lot of places will make a plan, say this is the plan, and then 6 months later everybody forgets about the plan, nobody keeps up with the plan, nobody's disseminating information, nobody's telling us where we are relative to the plan, and it all just starts to fall apart. So how do we ensure that we stay on track here? We're going to talk about visioning and goal setting. First, how do you come up with a plan? Creating a clear vision and translating that into something measurable. Then we're going to talk about the role of management in all of this. What should the managers be doing? It's usually not what you think. Then we talk about environmental analysis. So we'll do SWOT for this, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then strategic formulation. How do you come up with the actual plan? Implementation planning. How do you put that to actual measurable things that happen in some order? And then risk management, because no matter how good your plan is, things go wrong. And you have to be prepared for that. So we'll talk about all of these, mostly tools. My first favorite step, make a vision board. I love doing vision boards. They're uninhibited. They're unstructured, you're creative. You put, like if I had this room, do we have 150 here again? Oh, I thought this was supposed to be a breakout session. I was told 50. Okay, so we might be a little bit off. I have to pivot. So what we would normally do is break up into teams of some size and then come up with a bunch of ideas. There is no such thing as a right or a wrong idea at this stage. You just put all the ideas down. And don't be the person telling somebody else at this stage, your idea is bad. There is no such thing as a bad idea at this stage. All right? We established that team, cross-functional, interdisciplinary, and representative of the stakeholders. Do not create teams of like-minded people. They will all come up with the same idea. You need a little bit of everybody. And sometimes it's not just you, right? You have to take into account the people that you are working with, working for, etc. So have all the stakeholders there. Then perform the brainstorming, open, expressive, freewheeling, just let the ideas flow out. What is the vision? What is the future? What do we want to accomplish? Somebody will always say world domination, and we all laugh, right? Unless you mean it. Then it could be a problem. But be inclusive. All ideas are good at this point, even if they're unrealizable. Never in a million, I'm an engineer, okay? I remember when the cell phone camera came out. I think a decent number of people in this room remember when a cell phone camera came out. They were terrible. It was a bad idea. We had proper cameras. Why would you want to carry around this terrible camera that has like 80 pixels in your pocket and pay so much money? We were all wrong. How many of you actually own a real camera now? Only a couple. How many of you have a cell phone camera? All of you. All right? So that idea, to me at the time, was like putting a TV on a toaster. Why would you put a camera in a cell phone? And it was an exceptional idea. So you never know what will work. You just don't know. So your brainstorming method. 1, intentionally uninhibited. 2, before you show up to this brainstorming session, have at least 5 ideas. At least 5. You want to have something starting. So if you're brainstorming about what should be the future of our organization, have everyone come in with 5 ideas, write them down. You see other people's ideas, it gives you a new idea. You're like, yeah, I like that and I like this. What if we put it together? Like a camera on a cell phone. I'm never going to stop talking about that. Don't inhibit anyone. Go for quantity, not quality. Quality comes later. Okay? Then encourage this freewheeling. Bounce these ideas. Interact. Just laugh. Have a good time. See what comes out. Let that creativity flow. Do not criticize. Have everyone participate and record everything. Every single idea that comes out. Then, take that list of all those ideas, give it to everyone that participated, break up for a couple of days, sleep on it, read them, see what comes to mind, come back, And now you start thinning the list. And you start thinking to yourself, because you'll go home and you'll be like, yeah, that was a good idea, but can we actually do that? You have to take time on these subject matters and really think them through. And then you reduce the list with the team to the most viable ideas, usually no more than the 5 top viable ideas for future vision, application, or practice. Now we have to have, I'm going to talk more about management later, but at this stage, it's important to have somebody good managing this process. And I have to include it now. Good manager encourages participation. Not everybody is always comfortable participating. There are barriers to participation. You feel uncomfortable, you're shy. Everyone's opinion matters. We never know what's going to come out of your mind. That's the beauty of it. So you are valuable, you should participate, you should put it out there. Maybe it'll be the next big thing, maybe it won't. That's okay. And a good manager will make you comfortable in this environment. Resolving conflicts. Every organization has conflicts. Doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes the conflicts are very big and high. People put up fists, they throw punches. I hope it never reaches that stage. But other times the conflicts are small. I don't want to work with that person. Right? They make me mad. I don't want to talk to them. It's trivial, but it inhibits creativity and it inhibits the progression of the organization. So the best thing that a manager can do is resolve these conflicts, manage the process, and be the problem solver, the person that solves things, rather than creating the problem. Do you know someone that has a role of power and they are the problem?
Wow, that's a big problem.
Yeah. Don't be that person. Don't. It's counterintuitive, and most organizational failures are a result of poor management. There's also this other conversation that everyone progresses to the stage where they can no longer progress. So you get a promotion because you're so good at your job, and then your last promotion, you're terrible at your job, and that's where you stay. So everybody in their end role stops at the role where they're bad. Think about that for a moment. Because otherwise they would have been promoted, right? So your terminal position is the position you're no longer good at. Be wary of that. Always try to be your best. That actually doesn't happen in a lot of organizations because people will identify where they fit, but for some people, unfortunately, it does. Lead by example, not by fear or threat. There's an old expression from when I was in industry. We called them the pharaoh or the foxhole. There are 2 types of leaders. The pharaoh says, carry me on your shoulders and build me a pyramid. The foxhole, much like in the example is from war, which I don't really like this example, but I haven't found a different one. It's the person that runs in first and says, follow me. Right? You want to be the person that runs in first and says, follow me. The leader should lead by example, not lead through fear, threat, or coercion. Because that is not a successful organization. We'll talk about this more later. So, the first process we're going to talk about is called SMART. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. This is a process for establishing goals of an organization. It's very straightforward. Has anybody in business school and has seen this? You've seen, oh, okay, I'm preaching to the choir. Guess what? I'm an engineer. I didn't go to business school. But we still use these tools because organization is an organization. So 1, specific. What will be accomplished? What actions will you take? Who, what, when, where, the W's. Be specific about what the goal is. Then do something or establish something measurable. We'll talk about measurable in a couple different ways, but how are you going to measure that specific thing? Good questions for this are how much, how well, Like if you say, all right, we want to do outreach, that's the specific goal, but outreach for who? What kind of outreach? When are we going to do it? Where will the outreach be? Right? That's the specific. Then the measurable. How will we define the success of this outreach? A moment ago we were talking about surveys, right? So you have to define different ways that you could actually measure the success of that specific goal. Then achievable. Always go through an experiment. Is it realistic to outreach to 20,000 people in a single event? I don't know, I couldn't do it. But 150? I can do. So then, is it doable? Do you have the skills? Do you have the resources? Is this something that you can actually accomplish? And is it relevant? Because sometimes we establish goals that just don't make sense. I mean, I've seen it a million times where an organization says, we're going to do this thing. And you say, why? Because we're going to do it. Okay, why? How does this achieve the broader organization goal? Oh, it gives us some kind of rapport or publicity. Yeah, but what does that, goal here, your idea here, where do they relate? So make sure that it's relevant. And then finally, time bound. Can you actually achieve it in the time frame that you're supposed to? So this is what usually a SMART goal planning form looks like. There's a lot of different ways to do this. This is a sample one that I pulled off of the internet. But you bring the team together. This is the same stakeholders, usually in smaller breakout sessions. You've already done the big vision board and you've talked about what is the big picture. Now you're taking that big picture and you're narrowing it down into specifics. So we took the big thing, we chiseled it down to like 5 big ideas, the points. What do we want to do? Then we get into specificities. How are we going to measure their success? Are they attainable? Are they relevant? And can we do them in the time frame that we want to do them? Now you're starting to make a plan, right? Then we have to do environmental analysis. This is where we use tools like SWOT. What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? I see people shaking their head again. You've seen this before. All right, we're just doing a college lecture now. So SWOT is actually very nice because you define your purpose of something specific from this plan. And then you gather information. You look at your organization and you say, all right, this is what we're really good at. Are we good at outreach? Are we good at community service? Where do we shine? What is the thing that will progress us the fastest? All right? Then you identify your weaknesses. Where have we historically not succeeded? Where do we need more effort? Where are we missing resources? What is a weakness of the organization? Then you look at the external opportunities and the threats. Things present themselves all the time, right? This presentation kind of fell in my lap. And I jump on it. It's an opportunity. It's an external opportunity. And then there's always threats. Threats later we will turn into failure modes, which we'll talk about that in more detail. We categorize this into a SWOT diagram, then we analyze it, and we prioritize. Because we have to get our priorities straight. If we don't have priorities, we don't have a strategic plan. And we have to keep reinforcing these priorities. So here's an example of a SWOT analysis. Now, I want you to tell me, you're an organization. What are some of your strengths? Anyone? Friendliness. Community? You're committed. That's a good strength. Then you go through the tough. Yes? That's actually very good. Like you have actual leadership paths with established like mentorship and everything. Okay, that's something that I would leverage very strongly. Yes.
Core philosophy.
Core philosophy. And everybody agrees with the core philosophy?
Well, Buddhism as a whole, in general, Buddhism would be our core philosophy.
All right. But do you have something beyond that? This is an opportunity. Right? There is the belief in the core philosophy, but there also has to be a motivation. Remember, an example being, I do not share this necessary core belief, right? I'm an outsider, but I'm here. I have separate motivation, and that motivation is just purely professional development. It makes me happy and it makes me feel good to ensure that others have information that I can provide, regardless of what the outcome is. We may not agree on everything, but I want you to be developed. And similarly, I'm going to be over here chatting, trying to learn as much as possible from you. So these are the types of strengths. Now that may be an opportunity of the organization. Do you have a mission beyond the core values? Do you have something driving you that gives you that extra push, that extra reason beyond? Any weaknesses you can think of? Yes. Are you willing to share them? All right. Generational gap. Well, we talk. Language barrier. Communication. So,
The young people.
well, the young people started with generational gap. So, which I'm part of that gap because punctuation. So, now you're just capping. Did I use that right? I gotta work on my Riz. Did I use that right? I have a list of 40 of them that my students made for me, and I use them all wrong intentionally. It's part of the joke in the report building. But now we're going back to the other presentation. But this is real on the other side. So we did only hear from some of the younger members. Any of the more senior members? Can you identify any types of weaknesses that we should work on? Is it the gap, the age gap again?
It would say language also.
Language? What was it?
Commitment.
Commitment? So that comes back to that opportunity of the additional, the commitment is an interesting one, right? And this organizationally is actually a very big problem with strategic planning. Committing to the plan. We're gonna make a plan, but if you walk out of here and you don't believe in that plan and you don't invest in that plan, 50% of plans fail on 50% of their goals. You have to be invested in the plan. We're doing this as a room of 150 people, right? Invest in this planning process. I set this up as an example for the organization. We could literally do the whole thing right now. So I'm cool with it. They're all here. But this is it. So then the opportunities. I wouldn't call commitment a weakness. I would call commitment the opportunity. You have to find the thing that invests more of your membership. That is an opportunity because it can change. Now, how you do that, we figure that out later, right? We have other techniques for figuring out how to do that. Threats. So then we put all these down and you start thinking to yourself, how do we address them, right? You know what your strengths are. You know what your weaknesses are. You know what your opportunities are, and you know what your threats are. And first thing is always you have to mitigate the threats. We have a hierarchical order, right? The S and the T are the first things that you focused on. You take your strengths and you try to use them against your threats. Because if you use your strengths against your threats, then you can balance the organization. Then you use your opportunities against your weaknesses. You say that a threat is retention. I would say that a weakness is retention. And the reason that I would say that is because an opportunity is giving a second level of meaning to why you do this. If you can establish something above and beyond that makes individuals want to participate for a certain calling even further, something else that makes them want to participate in the organization, then the weakness of retention goes away. Think of it like a job, right? You have employees at an organization. They don't like their job and they want to quit. Is that a weakness of the organization or is that a threat to the organization? Because you can always hire more people and the organization will live on. If we're talking about a company. You have to first identify what is the opportunity. You survey. Why are people quitting? And then you find out the reason why. And you say, this is an opportunity. How can I use my strengths to work on my opportunity to eliminate this weakness? So if I keep hearing something like, I have this manager in my organization that alienates people. By the way, I'm speaking from experience here at this point. At my company, I had an engineering manager that just, people didn't like working with him, right? And this caused a retention issue. I had a 30% turnover rate. 30% turnover rate. Hire 10 people, 3 of them would quit because of one person. Do you know how much lost wages and lost salary that is? Especially in like engineering. We're talking about like $200,000+ of lost wages a year because of a person. So what do? We sent that person to training. And we told them, you find new meaning in why you like this role or you leave the organization. Because if I'm losing 3 person for one, and I lose 3 people a year for one, I would rather lose the 1 than the 3. Now, is that necessarily the right approach in this type of situation? Not necessarily. Business is different. Business is about money, different situations. But you have to think to yourself, where and how. So now that we know the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we get into our strategic formulation. We need a direction and a focus. We need to figure out where our edge is. So the direction and focus is, what is our vision? What is our mission? What is our long term? And in one set, can any of you tell me what that is for you? What is the mission? To develop youth.
To be a productive member of the society.
And a good Buddhist, a true Buddhist person.
Yeah, true Buddhism. They corrected them.
Pick on the back? It's always the front third.
Click on the fourth.
But this is the question, right? What is the mission? What is the vision? If you're thinking about it, then this is an exercise that needs to occur, right? Nobody should have to think about this. Do you remember my first slide? 95% of people don't know what the strategic plan is. I'm telling you, 95% of people don't know what the strategic plan is. This is true across all organizations, 100%. So be part of the 5% that know. Now, to do that, this must be constantly reiterated, constantly tracked, and constantly presented so that everybody knows where they are in this plan. What is the long-term objective? Now, the long-term objective may be to become a contributing member of society, right? Well, how do you measure that? If we can't measure it, can we actually ever say that we achieved it? So this turns into one of those questions. And we'll talk about how to address those questions later in the presentation. Competitive edge. Identify your unique capabilities. There's 150 people in this room, all close to it. I have no doubt that every single one of you has a unique skill that you can bring to this organization that you can leverage to make it better and to help your peers and to help improve. The question is, what are your unique skills? Can you identify them, or can somebody else help you identify them? And then can you leverage them and put them to good use? Then in the grander scheme, we'll talk later about organizational structure, of how to create functional groups so that you can truly leverage these in large power. Because you may have, do any of you live stream? No, a little bit, a couple? All right, I see one functional group. Some people. Is it organized? All right, we have an opportunity. Because some people know. Now, do we have anybody that's a musician? All right. And is that implemented in your organization in some way, shape, or form? Yes? And you all work together as musicians? All right, you have a functional group, you're ahead of me. And then we can keep making lists of unique skills, competitive edges, and traits. But then we have to ask ourselves, how do we take these things and turn them into strategies? Right? Like we mentioned live streaming, which is not currently organized as a functional group. So we would organize that as a functional group, and then we have to think about what is the strategy to use it to progress the mission of the organization. But the problem is, first we have to take a step back and say, what is the actual mission, what is the actual goal, and how are we going to measure it? Because if you start live streaming, is it working? How is it working if you don't have a way to measure whether it's working? So we keep going in big circles. And this is why we establish performance indicators. Now we'll have two things, performance indicators and metrics, and they're two slightly different things. But we establish these to measure progress, such as growth, market share, satisfaction, etc. So here's one thing that you could do. You can make yourself a nice chart and ask yourself, what is affecting us, right? We have economic forces. Money, right? Money is something that we need to address. How do we do that? We can do that through promotion of the organization for fundraising, right? Social forces. Different social forces affect things. For example, it was mentioned earlier, age gap, right? How do we do this? What kind of places, what kind of situations can we put ourselves in to minimize this? What kind of communication can occur between those groups to minimize these problems? We'll have, some of this is set up for pure business, so I'll get over those. But you also have competitive forces, right? You're competing for people's time, which affects retention. Never think that you're not competing for someone's time. Even in your personal relationships, you are competing for time. And there is only one asset that everyone has a finite amount of, and it's not money. It's not anything else. It's time. It is the most valuable asset that you have, and no billionaire, trillionaire can get more of it. So remember, this is what you're competing for. It's the most valuable thing. So how do you make that worthwhile? Right? How do you convince somebody to get off their phone and spend time on this? It's hard. So we have to come up with ideas. I like to use these things called fishbone diagrams. They're also known as Ishikawa diagrams. They're known as 4M. In engineering and manufacturing, we have a ton of different names for them. A lot of the time, they're just used for ideation, where you have a cause and an effect, and you have to think about what gets me from point A to point B. How could I do this? It very clearly states the first main issue that you want to address. Then you break this apart into categories of how you can address it. And then the goal is that by the end, you want to have the outcome that you want. So here's an example of a cause and effect fishbone diagram. I do these for products, right? I'm an engineer, but it applies virtually anywhere. So I need to fix some sort of problem, and I look at the equipment that I'm using, the process that I'm using, the people that are involved, the management, the environment, the materials, and I look at how they all contribute to the outcome or the problem that I want to solve. And I put it all out there and I look at it and I say, all right, now that it's all on paper and I'm staring at it, how do I actually want to address this? Because a lot of the time what we do is we start hitting things with a hammer. And that's not the right way to fix something, right? The toaster broke. Do you hit it with the hammer or do you troubleshoot it? You go to the back of the manual, the troubleshooting, right? And you do things systematically. Because if you start hitting it with a hammer, you're left with a broken hunk of metal. But this is how many people approach problems. You say, we need to do X, Y, Z, and then you jump to something without thinking about it. And this actually creates organizational barriers. So we plan our implementation. We've gotten to this stage. We have the big picture. What is our goal? What is our mission? What do we want to accomplish? What do we want to measure? All of these things. And then we say, well, how are we actually going to do it? Keeping your eye on the prize. So in implementation, I love this quote. It's actually by one of my peers that I work with at the university. I took classes with him, and he wrote a book on exactly this subject matter, Michael Brown. And he says, progress is the only measure of success, and monitoring is the only method to measure progress. So think about that for a moment. Progress is the only measure of success. Do we agree? You have to be steps ahead of where you were to state that you're moving towards success. But if you can't actually measure something to say that you've gotten there, then you haven't gotten anywhere. If there is no measurable result, I hear this all the time from students, like, I studied so hard, but you failed the exam. So the measure of your progress is failure. Right? So the question is, what do I need to do and how do I measure it to ensure that I have the outcome that I want? You have to measure and you have to track. So we have project planning tools. Some of them are detailed tracking, some are linear, some are sequential. I'm going to talk about 3 major ones. And they're confusing and I really wish I had more time, but each one would take at least an hour. So I'm going to put the idea in your brain so that you can go off and learn about some of these. So the common tools we're going to talk about are Gantt charts. Who's used a Gantt chart? All right. Business or engineering? Business? How many engineering? And engineering? All right. Those are usually, anybody that's not business or engineering but used the Gantt chart? Oh, those are always the 2 majors. Okay. CPM, critical path method. Nobody knows that one? Okay, that's a very complicated version of a Gantt chart. Same with PERT. Kanban. Do we have any computer scientists? Are you CS? Yeah? CS? And you do Kanban? Cool. So we have 3 different approaches. One is mostly a business approach, the second is mostly an engineering approach, and the third is mostly a computer science approach. But they're all insanely useful tools. So, Gantt charts. I love these to death for easily showing where we are in something. You say we have a plan. So you make the plan in a Gantt chart. And you say, at this date, we start this task, which progresses to another task, which moves to another task, and continues to move forward. And we can measure where we are on the road to achieving our goal. Now, Gantt charts have pros and cons. The pro is, if you look at this and you've never seen it before, it's basically just an Excel spreadsheet showing you where you are in like a weekly planner of achieving your goals. It's pretty easy to read. Do you agree? It's not terrible. Now, another nice thing is you could have parallel tracks. So these goals are happening in parallel while these goals are happening in parallel. This task tree is completely independent of this task tree, and everything can progress in the organization across multiple sequential and parallel series of events, which in large organizations, this is nice. But it has a fundamental problem. You can't tell me the critical path. And the critical path is the most important path to be monitored. I'll talk more about that momentarily. Also, the nice thing about Gantt charts is that they can be focused on people, tasks, resources, or costs. So here, for example, a single progression is going from person to person to person to person before you reach the final iteration. And that's fine. This is very nice about Gantt charts. And they really help you visualize and see, where am I relative to achieving my goal? Agreed? Critical path method, a lot more confusing. All right, so I like, did you hear all of the kind of nonverbal, grunts? Yeah, see, this is where I know I lost you. Communication. So in a critical path method, we're monitoring the most important thing that is critical to our organization. So let's say that there is a single sequence of events. In this case, it would be task A, C, F, I, K, L to get to the end. And the reason that this is a critical path is because it takes me 4 plus 8, that's 12, plus 4, that's 16, plus 6, that's 24, plus 2, that's 26, plus 1, 27 weeks. Any other path that I take, for example, 4 to 7 to 19 to 21 to 22 is less. So what happens if one of these tasks is interrupted or delayed on the critical path? Everything gets delayed. The entire project gets delayed. Resource costs go up. Materials get wasted. Timelines, deadlines, problems happen. So we always monitor, in critical path method, we monitor the critical path. If anything on this track experiences a delay or a problem or a non-implementation, everything dependent on it will be delayed or fall apart. One of the reasons we use this a lot in engineering. But in an organization like yours, this can also be extremely useful. But typically, only some high-level manager monitors the critical path. Now, sometimes the critical path shifts. And that's possible. That maybe this task, which is on a parallel track off of the critical path, what if that gets delayed so much that now that path becomes the critical path? And it happens all the time in development of organizations. You'll say, all right, we're building a new community center. They didn't pour the foundation in time. Now it's winter. They can't pour concrete. All the events we were going to plan and host inside of that community center now are going to be delayed because they can't pour until spring. Everything got pushed back off the critical path. There is now a new critical path, which is completing the building, not planning the events. Now, would you know that if you didn't monitor the critical path? You wouldn't. You would get so far down the line and then you would realize, oh my goodness, this isn't going to happen. And that's a breakdown of the strategic plan. On the other hand, for very short-term goals, wow, it got very silent all of a sudden. We like Kanban. So Kanban, you just make bins. All right, this is a very in, first out type of approach. There's an exceptional book called Getting Stuff Done. I love that book. But it uses Kanban type techniques. So you'll have a to-do list, stuff that's getting worked on, the in progress, and things that have been completed. Now this is all in the short term. You're not monitoring a critical path. You don't have the big picture of what the end goal is. This is your day-to-day. I need to get all of these things done. And then sometimes priorities change and you get a priority backlog that you say these first before the to-dos. This can be created in a ton of different ways. If you just find different Kanbans, you'll see that some people have 8 bins, some have 3. It can be done anyway, but it's a very good tool for organizing what needs to be done. Now, you have to monitor progress, remember? If I don't see what's getting done, if I'm not monitoring it, if I'm not somehow tracking where I am in the grand scheme of things, then I can't really say I have accomplished anything because I have no proof or no measure or no metric. Gantt charts, I think for organizations, are usually the simplest to implement in the beginning. Critical path method is very nice for a high-level manager, somebody that's overseeing everything. And then the Kanbans are very nice for the day-to-day of all of you. Even think about it, think of it like chores. You get a chore list every day, and you just say, all right, this is what I need to do, this is what I got done, this is what's in progress. It's very useful. So let's measure the performance now. Well, one way to do this is through key performance indicators. I'm going to use the example of a company. Every company cares about revenue and profit. And you track it. You measure it. Like in your organization, I'm assuming you would measure membership as a key performance indicator. Right? What are some other KPIs for you? Attendance? Members? Turnover, retention, those are very important key performance indicators, right? Cost, graduation. So you would make a huge list of how do we measure our success? And then put numbers to it and look at it. And then ask yourself which ones are you going to monitor and which ones are you going to make a plan of and which ones are you going to address? What ideas are you going to come up with and how do you make it better? You have to start thinking of it kind of like a business. I always think of things like a business. Now, I don't know, my fiance always says I have to stop thinking of things like a business, but you know, relationships are relationship business. No, seriously, I mean, she'll give me a Kanban and she'll be like, dishes, walk the dogs, right? Critical path method, marriage. Remember, fiance? Okay. What do we have to do to get there? Because, I mean, if the dress gets delayed, that's the critical path.
Actually, stop with the Greek.
Stop. Oh, yeah, that's somewhere. Yeah, that's where it happens. The engagement was back here. Actually, with her critical path probably started the day she met me. The ring probably happened somewhere around here. But you're seeing my point, is that even in your day-to-day life, this applies. It applies. We tend not to do it, and we tend to think that things will just happen. They'll fall into place. And then when they don't, we ask ourselves, why? And we can't answer that question because we didn't monitor, we didn't track, we didn't measure. So this shows clear as day. The revenue went up, the profit not so much, right? Then we have something like metrics. So metrics are a little bit different. Metrics I like for doing comparisons. Like I'll say, let's say we want to do a bunch of outreach events. Each one has an associated cost, an associated attendance, an associated something. Now you put all of the metrics, all of the things that you can measure for every possibility, and compare it across every event. And then there will be some that make sense and some that don't. And you ask yourself, with limited resources, because every organization has limited resources, that is a fact. You ask yourself, within the limited resources, what are the actions that we could take to maximize our output? And then you track those. If you invest time and effort into things with minimal return, then you tend not to reach your goals, which also harms turnover and other things, because if people don't see progression, they tend not to stick around. Example, if there was no ring or wedding, would she stick around? You ask yourself that? Ask yourself that question, right? How many times in your life? There has to be a progression. It has to be measurable. People have to see the results. People have to see the outcome. And all stakeholders have to be aware. Because if they're not sure what the point is. And if you're not sure what the point is, you tend to initially retreat and eventually fall off. So let's talk about risk management now. We all have organizational risks. And we tend to do these with failure mode effect analysis. I love failure. There's other ways of doing risk management, but failure mode effect analysis to me is like, again, I'm an engineer. So it's a systemic approach to looking at failures in systems, processes, or organizations. Has anybody seen this before? A couple? All right. Engineers or business? Engineer and business. Okay, it's always engineer and business. Start thinking of your organization. So be the future leaders and start thinking of your organization from the perspective of the things that you learned. I'm serious. You will be extremely successful. So key components of the FMEA. Figure out what the failure modes are. Analyze the effects and severity of those failures. Because again, you only have a finite number of resources and you can only address so many things. So you should go after the things that have the biggest impact. True? So determine the likelihood of the occurrence, the ability to detect. I'll give you an example. And then the goal is going to be to improve, reduce costs, enhance satisfaction, and do continuous improvement. There is no such thing as good enough. There isn't. We can always do better. We could always try harder, and we can always get a better outcome. So here's an example of an FMEA for Zoom lecture. I hate Zoom lecture. You'll start. Oh, I forget that this has a. No, it doesn't work. So, Zoom function, online lecture. What are my possible failure modes? No internet, broken microphone, Zoom server down, right? All right, so if there's no internet, I can't host class. What's the cause of the failure? Comcast, because I hate them. How do I control this? Have a 5G backup modem, right? What is the severity? Well, the severity is a 9. It's if my internet goes down and my mode of control doesn't work, I can't host the class. What's the probability of this happening? It's Comcast. It's a 50-50 probability. So 5 right there. Detection, 2, I can easily detect it. If my internet goes down, I'm aware that my internet went down. It's not going to be a surprise to me. So then I take the severity, the probability, and my ability to detect it. I multiply them. I get a risk priority number. 9 times 5 times 2, I get 90. That is my risk priority number. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Microphone broken. Students can't hear me. Why? Because I probably spilled coffee on my microphone. Mode of control, I'm an idiot. I can't control myself spilling. Well, I guess maybe don't have coffee. So then, what is the severity? 7. I could type. They could still see my iPad. Probability, I don't spill coffee that much. Detection, oh, I'm not going to know until it happened. It's a big number. Risk priority number, 56. Detection, well, it's fine because the severity here is not very high, right? The lights went out, but the presentation goes on. So what kind of severity do I have? Is it severe? No. Probability? I don't think any of us would have predicted that. You think half-half? I've never had that happen in a class. This is my first time. Detection, we knew right away, but we couldn't have predicted it. I'd give that a low probability. But anyway, now, what if Zoom servers go down? Nobody can connect to class. It's Zoom servers. I can't do anything about this. I don't have a mode of control. Maybe I could use a backup like Microsoft Teams or some other software. But the fact of the matter is, the severity is high, right? We can't have class. The probability of it happening is pretty low. I've only had this happen a couple times in the time that I've been teaching. The detection, I would not know until too late. You try to have class, the Zoom servers are down, you can't have class. Now you're scrambling to email people, switch to this other thing. This has the highest risk priority number, so logically, this is what I should be most prepared for. I should be secondly most prepared for this. And then something like this, I may not prepare for, right? So I organize my risks based on what is their severity, probability, and detection. I assign them a risk priority number, and then I say, I compartmentalized. With the resources that I have, here are the most important things for me to address. Here are the least important things for me to address. This is how I'm going to utilize my resources. Make sense? I love this, by the way. This has gotten me out of so many binds. Then we have root cause analysis. This is a sample from the Compass for SBC. But this is sort of the thing. You have an apparent problem. So in this particular case, children under 5 years old are malnourished. And then you break it down into, well, what are the symptoms of this? How do we reach there? Not having enough food, not having the right kinds of food, giving the wrong kind of food, or giving the wrong kind of food, and giving other foods prior to switching. So then you go back and then you say, well, what are the possible causes of this occurring? Right? Like, why would we not have enough food? Money or soil, right? But similarly, right kind of food. Perhaps the animals are malnourished and you can't eat meat. Giving other foods before 6 months. This could be an educational thing, like mothers think babies need it. Maybe there are cultural constraints. Maybe they believe advertising for bottle feeding or something else, right? Or maybe inappropriate foods are due to tradition. You don't know. And you work your way down and you ask yourself, what actually caused this outcome? So you keep working backwards. You see the problem. It's me, I'm the drama. And then you take steps backwards and you say, how did we get here? What are all of the possible things that contributed to this negative outcome? So like, let's say retention, right? You want to retain members of the organization. So you ask yourself, why were they not retained? Well, first you have to establish some mechanism of detecting this. So things like surveys, contact, cold call, etc. And then they start to give you answers, and then you categorize those. And then you ask yourself, well, why did that happen? Where did that come from? What stemmed it? What caused it? And then eventually you reach the source. And once you have the source, you mitigate the problem. Have you ever done root cause analysis in an organization like this? And hasn't? Give it a shot. Give it a shot. I love these types of tools, hands down. So then, let's talk about, we're going to take a complete pivot. So we talked about all of these tools. But at the end of the day, tools are tools. And we need people to use the tools. So now we have to talk about good leadership. And we're going to talk about the interface with organizational structure and how to make decisions. Because all of these come along with how does leadership exist. So first, the attributes of a good organizational leader. They should be visionary. Think steps ahead. Don't think about, obviously you have to take care of right now, but it's not just about the right now. It's about the future. Effective communication. We had an entire lecture about this, but if people don't understand what the leader is saying, then that's a problem. Empowering the employees, or in this case, members of the organization, right? If people don't feel empowered, it's a problem. You don't necessarily want to be part of something that you don't feel like you have a say in. If you're not a buy-in, if you're not an active stakeholder, you feel like a cog and not valued. And eventually that causes problems. Adaptability. Things happen. You can't always remain steadfast. You have to pivot. Something happens, all right, we need to change the plan a little bit. Let's go back to this planning stage again. Integrity and ethics, right? Is it somebody that you can trust? And do they lead by example? They should be a champion, not a dictator. Always champion on behalf of your people. So good leaders respect. Good leaders encourage the professional development. Good leaders promote individuals. They raise them up. They don't bring them down. Good leaders are not feared. Good leaders are respected. Good leaders are trusted, right? So, org structure. We have different types of organizations, and each one has its own pro and con. How am I doing on time? Oh, I forgot when this ends. Oh, okay. Then good. This is the last one. We have either functional or project organizations, or a matrix. For this type of organization, I would always say a matrix of you have projects going on, and you will either have functional managers, or you have projects going on, and you have project managers. Right? Think to yourself, what's more important, the people, the function, or the project, the task that you're trying to accomplish? Because those are going to be the two things that dictate how you get there. Oh, and then decision making. I think this was the last slide. Use decision matrices. Make them transparent. Anytime you make a decision, get the buy-in from people and show people what the options were and what the different features they were weighted across, and that this was the best choice. If it is transparent to people why decisions were made, they do not question decisions, which also results in a lot of problems with management and leadership. All right, I don't think I have time for questions then. I apologize. I thought that was going to be faster. Thank you. So, a lot of tools.